Hello everyone and happy Friday. I'm Nitsa and I bring you guys a new MTG Top 10 each and every week. This week we're doing something I've done a few times, looking at the best cards from a single set. In this case we're looking at Planeshift. Planeshift came out way back in 2001 and had 143 cards. In this video we're going to talk about the 10 that have had the biggest impact on the competitive tournament circuit. Looking at a set specifically is a different way of looking at cards than I usually do, and it gives us a way to look back and evaluate what a particular set did for Magic, so it is something I'm interested in doing. But as was the case the other times I've done top 10s on single sets, which I did for Urza's Destiny and for Tempest, this time with Planeshift, I'm doing this as a way to simultaneously plug a YouTube channel that I think deserves a little bit more attention. That channel is the Card Bazaar, where they're producing a series called the Card Anthology series, where they're going through every single set in Magic and discussing its history. I enjoy these videos a lot, and their most recent addition to Card Anthology is on Planeshift. So while my video talks about the 10 cards from Planeshift that made the biggest impact on the competitive Magic scene, head over to the Card Bazaar for even more information about the set. Now, time for a quick reminder about how I score these lists. Cards receive points depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8s they've received, with a Pro Tour Top 8 worth twice as much as a Grand Prix Top 8. The cards in this list are arranged numbers 10 through 1, with the highest score being found at number 1. I also consider Legacy and Vintage Championship events as Pro Tour Top 8s so that those formats can be properly represented in the cards. Now, let's get started with number 10. At number 10, we have Eladamri's Call, which is a creature tutor. Tutor spells are powerful in properly constructed decks because they allow you to run singleton copies of creatures that are good in certain situations. These are often called toolbox creatures. In general, they make your deck more consistent and more flexible at the same time. Despite all those things going for it, Eladamri's Call went unplayed in Blocker's Standard. In Extended, though, it saw play in decks that ran creature-based combos, such as an infinite life gain deck that needed Daru Spiritualist for its combo. You could play your Eladamri's Call and find your Daru Spiritualist and then go off with your combo. It has also been included in some versions of Sneak and Show decks in Legacy, which likes to cheat powerful creatures into play using Show and Tell or Sneak Attack, and the Call could help you find the threat you wanted to cheat into play. The Call hasn't seen play in competitive Magic since 2015, though it is a staple in Commander decks, as most good tutors are. At number 8, we have Thorns Gate Meddling Mage, our first card with Kicker on this list. Invasion Block was the first time the Kicker mechanic was introduced, and it was pretty cool. It added more flexibility to cards because it allowed you to pay extra costs for extra effects in the later part of the game. There is a whole cycle of Battle Mages in this set who have a casting cost of 1 color and kicker costs in 2 other colors. Thorns Gate Meddling Mage is the best of the group, and none of the other ones make the list. The Battle Mage was strong because you could play it for 5 mana and get a 2/2, who could potentially get you a 3-for-1 since it could blow up an artifact, kill a creature with 2 or less toughness, and then trade with something on its own. It had such low kicker costs that it wasn't an impossible thing to do, though to be fair, more frequently only the red kicker cost was paid, and that alone made the card good. This flexibility and the power that comes with it was a big reason why red-green decks were so dominant in Invasion Block, picking up 4 of the top 8s at the Block Pro Tour. The Mage also picked up a World's Top 8 and a Grand Prix Top 8 in Standard, and it even saw a little bit of play in Extended, picking up 1 Grand Prix Top 8 there. Just a little aside about the whole cycle of these scape creatures. There are also Familiars, one of which we're going to see on this list, and Masters in the same cycle, who benefit other colors. They should all basically be staples in EDH decks that are in their 3 colors, and I think they're some of the most overlooked cards there are for EDH. But now let's move on to number 8. At number 8, we have Slate, which was not a card you really wanted to mainboard, but was an excellent card out of your sideboard. There is not much removal out there that replaces itself with a card draw effect, especially straight-up destroy effects. And that's because that is an insanely powerful thing to do, and Slate does that, although it is only capable of killing green creatures. It showed up in the sideboards of lots of control decks, first in the Invasion Block format where it picked up 2 Pro Tour Top 8s, and it was a good sideboard card in that format too, as evidenced by the 4 Top 8s at the same Pro Tour by red-green aggro decks. It also saw play in Standard in Psychotog control decks where it picked up 3 Top 8s at Worlds in 2002. We don't see this type of color hosing effect that often anymore, though we did have a cycle of it in Tarkir Block that used to be a much larger part of Magic. At number 7, we have a card that would be a leading candidate on the list of cards that I hated playing against the most in my life, Auram's Chant. Another card with kicker, Auram's Chant is the kind of card that just doesn't let your opponent play Magic, at least not for a turn. If you can cast this with the kicker during your opponent's upkeep, you get pretty close to just time-walking them. Despite being relatively powerful on its own, Auram's Chant didn't see any play in Blocker's Standard, and wasn't a card anyone was really thinking about, though it did pick up a few extended top 8s out of the sideboard. But then Mirrodin came along and printed Isochron's Scepter, and the two of these were played alongside one another in Extended. You could imprint the chant onto the Scepter and do it to your opponent every single upkeep to prevent them from ever casting anything. This prison deck came to be known as Scepter Chant and did a lot of work in Extended, and it was very rarely played in a deck that didn't also include the Scepter. Though it was also used by some more combo-oriented decks who could cast it during their own turn to prevent the opponent from interrupting their combo, such as the Daru Spiritualist combo that I mentioned earlier on in this video. At number 6, we have Nightscape Familiar. We saw that one of the battle mages from the Scape cycle made the list, and so did one of the familiars, Nightscape Familiar, who reduced the cost of blue and red spells while also providing a creature who could chump block forever, assuming you had the mana to regenerate it. Nightscape Familiar paired very well with Psychotog decks. These were blue, black, and sometimes red, blue, and black control decks that ran Psychotog, obviously, as the primary win condition. The Familiar not only made your Psychotog cheaper, it also made all of your counter magic and many of your removal spells and bounce spells cheaper, just what a blue mage wants to do. The Familiar almost exclusively saw play in Standard, putting up its most impressive showing at Worlds in 2002 by appearing in 6 of the top 8 decks, including the one that won Worlds that year. It also picked up a Pro Tour top 8 in Extended in 2004, this time in a combo deck built around Storm, where the Familiar could make it easier to get your Storm count up because he decreased the cost of all your spells. He hasn't seen play since 2004, but like the Battle Mage cycle, I think the Familiars are often overlooked by EDH players, and they should probably be played in any EDH deck that has these 3 colors. Next, we have Rushing River at number 5, a pretty powerful bounce spell because its kicker cost didn't cost any mana. You did have to give up a land, but bouncing 2 non-land permanents for 3 mana at instant speed would be insane today, and it was insane then. There's basically no way that you aren't returning more mana worth of cards to your opponent's hand than the 3 you spent to play this instant. In Standard, it saw play in a large variety of decks, but it was mostly successful there in decks built around Opposition, which was a deck that was all about getting Opposition online and just shutting your opponent out of the game. Rushing River could go a long way towards helping you get there. It also put up some numbers in Psychotog decks too, alongside our friend Nightscape Familiar. It saw play in Extended and Blue-Green Madness decks, in Psychotog decks in Extended, and in decks running the Goblin Charbelcher combo. It was mostly in the latter to help you find the time to combo off. Rushing River is powerful enough that it has even seen play in Legacy, putting up top 8s in tempo decks and combo decks like Ad Nauseam, but the most consistent success it has found is in Show and Tell decks. Decks that try to cheat a huge creature into play. It also happens to be good in the mirror because you can bounce your opponent's huge creature after it comes into play. It has actually picked up a Legacy top 8 as recently as last year and may not quite be done putting up points. At number 4, we have the card that I first thought of when I decided to do a video on Planeshift, and the card I thought would be number 1, and that is Flametongue Kabu. It comes in at number 4 instead, but to be fair, the 3 cards ahead of it have all been reprinted and have higher scores as a result of having a second shot at Standard and being legal in Modern. Flametongue Kabu has never been reprinted and is not legal in Modern, but he was and is an incredibly good card. You get a 4/2 body for 4 that is capable of killing the vast majority of creatures in the game. Flametongue Kavu is a creature to be feared, and I think one can probably compare how ubiquitous the Kavu was and how bad it felt when your opponent played it to how people have more recently felt about Siege Rhino. This thing was a monster and put up huge numbers across multiple formats because he was so powerful. Removal with a body was obviously quite good, and as a result he immediately saw play, appearing in 5 of the top 8 decks at the Block Pro Tour Tokyo in 2001. He wasn't a slouch in Standard either, where he showed up in basically any deck that could cast him. This included red-green aggro decks, but it also included decks built around the aforementioned Opposition, and Psychotog decks, even added red so that they could play the Kavu after he came around, which meant basically all of the Tier 1 decks of the format played Flametongue Kavu. Between Worlds in 2001 and Worlds in 2002, the Kavu picked up 7 top 8s. That's a pretty good indicator of how powerful this guy was. He saw some play in Extended too, though really only in aggro and burn decks there. He hasn't seen play anywhere since 2005, but he's definitely the kind of card that if they reprinted it today, would still be pretty good in spite of all the power creep on creatures. We would have to return to Dominaria to see Kabus again, though. At least I think we would. Sometimes we see people we only thought were on Dominaria in other sets, so who knows. Now, on to number 3. At number 3, we have Meddling Mage. The Mage was an invitational card. We have had one of these before on an MTG Top 10, Avalanche Rider, which has actually made 2 appearances. These cards are actually designed by someone who won a special invitational tournament, something that Wizards ran from 1997 to 2007, and the image on the card is intended to bear the likeness of that individual. Meddling Mage was designed by and bears the likeness of Chris Picula, someone who is still active in the community today. And man, is it a cool card. A 2-mana 2/2 with a ton of upside. The Mage is very powerful, especially devastating against combo decks. It was also good against decks that were built around one particular strategy, and we've been talking about cards like Opposition and Psychotog and Isochron Scepter in this video, so there were lots of decks built around one strategy and one card. You could also always just name removal, making sure the Mage and all the rest of your board stays safe. The Mage picked up 1 Pro Tour top 8 at the Block Pro Tour and only picked up 1 Grand Prix top 8 in Standard its first time through. In Extended, it saw a lot of play though, especially in an aggro control deck called Super Grow, but also in aggressive decks like White Weenie, Affinity, and Zoo. In some of these decks, it was a sideboard card to shut off cards like Isochron Scepter. Since it got reprinted in Alara Reborn, it got another run through Standard, though it didn't do a whole lot, only putting up 2 Grand Prix top 8s. However, the printing also meant it was legal in Modern, and it's picked up 3 Grand Prix top 8s in that format, one of them as recently as February of this year. It has started seeing play in collected company decks, where it is a nice hit off the top of your library, especially if you have an idea of what is in your opponent's hand. It seems like a likely inclusion in future versions of Bant Company, so I think that the Mage is likely to continue to put up points in Modern. At number 2, we have Terminate, an incredibly efficient way to kill a creature with no questions asked. Terminate has seen a lot of play. It picked up 2 top 8s in 2001 at the Invasion Block Pro Tour in control decks. Terminate has had 2 separate shots at Standard because it was also reprinted in Alara Block. Its first time through Standard, it showed up in Psychotog decks. It added red for it and Flametongue Kabu, picking up a World's top 8 and 2 Grand Prix top 8s in the deck. Its second time through Standard, it saw a lot more play though, primarily in the dominant Jund deck of Alara Standard. It saw play in Extended in a variety of aggressive Zoo and Jund decks, and in Modern it is a mainstay in the Modern version of Jund, though it has also done a little bit of work in Grixis Delver and more recently in Death Shadow Zoo decks. Because Terminate is still legal in Modern and still seeing a lot of play there, it has a very good chance at becoming the number 1 card on this list in a couple more years. But right now, the number 1 card on this list is Gainsay? I'm not sure anybody would have guessed that, but Gainsay is an incredibly efficient color hosing counterspell and a good way to deal with counterspells themselves. It was also reprinted in Theros Block, giving it 2 shots at Standard and Block, and also making it legal in Modern. Its first time through Block, it showed up in 3 of the top 8 decks, and the second time it made 1 top 8. In Standard, it saw a ton of play both times. The first time around, it was a nice sideboard card against Psychotog and Opposition. The second time around, it was a good sideboard card against Devotion to Blue, and a sideboard card that Devotion to Blue itself played for the mirror match. It also saw play in Extended, where Psychotog was also a force, putting up 2 Pro Tour top 8s and 1 Grand Prix top 8 there. However, since rotating out of Standard its second time, it hasn't seen play anywhere, despite being legal in Modern, while Terminate is, and it only has 8 points on Terminate, so its time at the top of this list may be ending soon. That does it for this week's MTG Top 10. Remember, if you want to learn more about Planeshift, head over to the Card Bazaar and check out their card anthology video on the subject. You can find a link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button. If you want to make sure you catch all of my top 10s, subscribe here and to the Ether Hub, another YouTube channel where I do top 10 lists. Also, just a reminder that my content is sponsored in part by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all things Magic. You can use my discount code NEEDSAHONE5 for a 5% discount in their store. Thanks for watching.